The silence in your dim wooden chamber held a different weight, a cold promise that brushed its fingers down your spine before the first morning light even filtered through the fragile paper doors. The pale blue of dawn cast ghostly shadows across the worn silk robes hanging silently nearby, their scent mingling with the faint trace of incense that hummed in the still air. Beneath your thin mat, the floor was hard and unyielding, a reminder that comfort was a luxury seldom afforded in this life. Outside, the courtyard stirred in slow motion. Footsteps shuffled over gravel, the soft rustle of kimono fabric weaving through the gentle murmur of distant voices. The world beyond your chamber felt both alive and frozen in time, predictable in its rhythm, yet stubbornly relentless. If today you panic over a dying phone battery, imagine the anxiety of witnessing your last ember flicker and fade within a chilly hearth that could not be rekindled with the flick of a switch. Your fingers traced the worn folds of your kimono again, smoothing the silk with a practiced gentleness that belied the monotony of your routine. The wooden pestle ground rhythmically against the mortar in the kitchen beyond, marking time with a hypnotic cadence as steady as your heartbeat. You rose and moved with deliberate grace, arranging delicate blossoms in a vase just so, their colors muted in the soft morning light, an echo of fleeting beauty in an otherwise unchanging day. The scent of pine from the nearby forest drifted through a window left ajar, blending with the faint aroma of rice simmering over a low fire. These quiet rituals defined your existence. The painstaking preparation of tea, the endless folding of paper cranes, the polishing of lacquerware that caught the light like whispered secrets. Romance was a fleeting visitor here, its warmth often eclipsed by the cold certainty of repetition. Yet, amidst the slow passage of hours, a small ember of hope flickered. From the hearth, a faint glow promised the comforting heat of a shared fire, the brief comfort of community in a world built on hierarchy and silence. You allowed yourself a rare moment to savor it, a stolen warmth before the inevitable return to solitude. Then, just as your thoughts began to drift and your eyelids grew heavy, something shifted. The usual murmurs ceased abruptly. Even the dog's evening chorus fell silent. A charged glance flickered between neighbors in the courtyard, an unspoken tension, like a stone skipped over still water, sending ripples through the calm surface of your carefully ordered world. What crossed their eyes was a secret you could not yet know, but it promised disruption. The delicate balance of your days, the slow, measured breath of your existence, was about to change. Hey, before Morpheus catches you completely, take a quick moment to check if you're still subscribed. For some, the button disappeared, and I don't want you to miss the next bedtime stories. While you're at it, drop a like as soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this little corner of calm alive. Thanks for being part of it. The stillness that had hovered moments before dissolved into a subtle but charged murmur. From the shadowed recesses of the courtyard, a ripple of movement unfurled. Hesitant footsteps stepped beyond the usual rhythm, precise, like the measured strokes of a calligrapher's brush, now daring to stray from the page. The delicate fabric of the morning, woven with habitual quiet, began to fray. You stepped closer to the paper doors, their translucent panels casting a fragile lattice of light and shadow across the polished wooden floor. The scent of pine mingled now with a sharper tang. Smoke snaked through the small crack where the door didn't quite meet the frame. A faint but distinct aroma, not of your usual incense, pressed against your senses. Something was different, though the world beyond your chamber still clung to its muted grayness. Outside, voices tangled briefly, whispers undulating like wind through bamboo stalks. Not the practiced murmur of everyday exchange, but something taut, cautious, edged with urgency. A flap of fabric, the soft rustle of hurried kimono sleeves, disrupted the usual composed slowness. Your fingers gripped the edge of the doorframe, the glossy lacquer cold beneath your touch. Heartbeats echoed in your ears, but not in the familiar steadiness you've come to know. This was different, an expectant pause threaded through the pulse of the day. You can smell ash, faint but honest. A fire sparked. Beyond routine, its glow promising warmth but also warning of change. The hearth's old comfort now felt like a flicker on the edge of dusk rather than dawn's embrace. The village, your world, was stirring not just with life, but with the breath of something new, something that would crack open the slow, deliberate cadence of your days. In the courtyard, a figure emerged, tall, but wrapped in the shadows of early light. His robe whispered secrets with every sharp step, fabric trailing like a shadow, reluctant to reveal its bearer fully. Eyes briefly met yours, and in that look lay a secret, a message that slipped between words and lingered in the hush beneath. The neighbor's eyes tracked his passage, narrowing in silent consensus. A woman broke from the cluster, her voice laced with urgency, yet carefully measured. Words floated, a mention of the magistrate, an unexpected summons. The ideas swirled like falling cherry blossoms caught in a sudden breeze. A disturbance at the provincial gates, whispers of unrest, the stirrings of something that didn't belong to your quiet, ordered life. Your hands slid along the wood, grounding yourself as your mind raced. The world you knew, the routine forged in slow time and silence, was at risk of shattering. But as always, beauty lingered even in upheaval. The first sunbeam caught the curve of a bent reed nearby, setting it aflame with gold. And for a moment, The day held the delicate balance between calm and storm. Elsewhere, a low bell chimed across the rooftops, a somber note, threading through the clatter of hurried wheels and rising voices. The air thickened with expectancy as shadows lengthened, swallowing familiar landmarks beneath an uncertain sky. Was it fear that reached through the village, or the sharp edge of history about to carve a new path? You stepped outside, the wooden floor creaking softly beneath your feet that now moved more quickly than they had in weeks. The ground was cool under the thin sandals, smooth yet stubborn, reminding you how little mercy these stones had offered, even in peace. The courtyard was no longer just an echo of calm mornings. It buzzed with questions, gazes heavy with unsaid plans. Children, usually wide-eyed with innocent curiosity, now drew close to their elders, their faces pale beneath tousled hair, sensing the shift deeper than words could speak. Among the murmurs, more voices joined, some strained, some resolute. The magistrate's arrival was no small matter. It meant judgment, change, perhaps even the revelation of long-buried secrets. You felt the weight of unseen eyes watching, the invisible threads of power tightening around your village's fragile heart. Even as the scent of rice and pine lingered faintly on the breeze, it was tinged now with a sharper edge, smoke of unknown origin, fear that rode in silent waves, and a fragile hope clinging like morning mist to every breath. Your gaze fell upon the distant forest, where shadows danced between trunks, hiding stories you could feel but not yet see. The world beyond your thin walls was stirring, unpredictable, stark, and relentless. The hearth's ember in your chamber seemed a fragile thing in comparison, a soft defiance in a growing wind. You exhaled slowly, steadying your breath. The day had begun so quietly just moments ago, yet now it carried the weight of a turning point, subtle but unyielding. As the summons sent ripples through your carefully ordered existence, you realized this was no ordinary dawn. And as the figure disappeared into the folds of the village path, a shadow detached itself from the deeper woods, eyes glinting faintly, as if carrying a message of their own. In that glance, a promise. The world was about to reveal something long hidden, and you would not be able to look away. The courtyard held its breath, the air taut with unspoken urgency. You stepped through the paper door, the faint crackle of the rice paper barely clinging to its frame as you slid it open. Outside, the early light tangled with shadows, twisting the familiar lanterns into shapes both strange and foreboding. The scent of smoke drifted heavier now, not from the gentle hearth that usually warmed your mornings, but from somewhere beyond, the edges of the village, where secrets festered beneath the pines. The murmurs swelled into fragmented conversations. Voices dipped in caution, like swimmers dipping toes into unknown waters. You felt the weight of all those glances, watchful eyes shaded with worry, some sharpened by suspicion. The magistrate's summons had shattered the usual rhythm, turning the steady heartbeat of your world into a staccato pulse. A cluster of neighbors stood near the temple's entrance, their faces pale under the soft light. The elders exchanged frantic whispers, voices low but edged with palpable fear. Children held silently at their sides, sensing the tension, but too young to untangle its meaning. The village's breath held, waiting for news that rippled through the mist like invisible stones skipped on a still pond. You noticed the man from the shadows again, now closer, his steps hesitant yet purposeful. His eyes caught yours briefly once more, dark pools reflecting a message buried beneath layers of restraint. There was a tremor of something unspoken between you, a shadow cast long and wide, stretching far beyond the quiet wood planks beneath your feet. Smoke curled faintly from a nearby brazier, the ribbon of ash twisting. Against the cool morning air, a stray breeze swept through, carrying with it the damp earth's musk and the metallic tang of distant iron, a scent that stirred a chord deep within. This was no ordinary fire. It carried the echoes of disruption, of boundaries crossed and promises broken. You moved toward the gathering, each step stirring loose gravel and brittle leaves. The smooth stones beneath your sandals, worn by countless seasons, now felt less a foundation and more a fragile veneer over shifting ground. Voices parted as you approached, a hush descending like a curtain. The village's stories, delicate as paper cranes folded with care, were unraveling, their edges frayed by the reality creeping in. The woman who had spoken earlier caught your gaze, her calm facade flickering. "The magistrate requests everyone to prepare," she whispered, voice brittle as dried bamboo. "There's talk of rebels at the gates. They say the peace we've known is crumbling." A thread of cold spiked through your spine. Rebels. The word hung heavy, as if etched into the air itself. In a life carved by silence and routine, the intrusion of rebellion was an unforgivable dissonance. You pictured the provincial gates, stoic and silent, now pressing under unseen weight. The courtyard's usual harmony fractured beneath the weight of this new reality, like a lacquer bowl cracked, its beauty forever marked by flaws. The comforting warmth of your chamber's hearth now seemed distant, a flicker swallowed by a gathering storm. Among the gathered, someone passed a bundle of folded letters, their edges worn and stained. They bore the magistrate's seal, red ink stamped with authority and finality. You imagined these messages as shards of change, each word a step into an uncertain future. The scent of pine mingled with the harsher smoke, the forest standing like a silent sentinel, watching the village's uneasy stirrings. Somewhere beyond the trees, shadows moved, silent figures stretched thin across the underbrush, watchers or messengers, invisible to most, but not to you. Your breath hitched as the bell's solemn chime echoed again, drawing a line between what was and what might soon be. The sound wove through the rooftops, threading together fractured glances and hushed fears, binding the village in collective tension. There was beauty in the moment's fragility, a bent reed catching golden sunlight, the slow descent of a solitary leaf, spiraling down like a slow dance interrupted. But beneath that fragile beauty, the truth pressed hard. The stillness was a prelude to upheaval. You found your fingers brushing the curve of a lacquer box, polished smooth by years of repetition. The touch grounded you briefly, a thread back to quieter times. Yet even this relic of calm felt fragile under the weight of what lay ahead, as if at any moment it could shatter and scatter, like so many folded cranes across your tatami mat. A sudden movement caught your eye, a shadow detaching from the forest's edge, slender and silent. The figure paused just beyond clear sight, eyes glinting faintly like distant stars in a twilight sky. In that gaze lay a secret, cold and sharp as the blade hidden beneath the magistrate's robe. The village held its breath again, now suspended on the cusp of a decision it had no choice but to make. The world beyond your chamber was shifting. Quiet walls, soon to echo with voices that would never be the same. You pulled your robe tighter, feeling the silk cool and familiar against your skin, a fragile armor against the uncertain dawn. And then, just as the light faltered between night and day, a distant cry split the air, a sudden piercing sound that shattered the fragile mosaic of morning. Your eyes snapped to the forest's edge, where the shadow moved again, vanishing into the depths as if claiming the darkness for itself. The day, you realized, had already begun to unravel, and you were caught between the calm you knew and the storm rushing fast behind that last fading ember. A luz matinal tropeçava nas bordas das folhas, estendendo sombras longas sobre o caminho franzido que serpenteava entre as casas. O murmúrio da vila mudava seu tom, do costumeiro sussurro compassado a algo mais abrupto, tilintar nervoso de olhares que se desviavam, silêncios pesados. O seu passo soava com firmeza disfarçada, enquanto atravessava a soleira que separava a quietude do seu quarto do turbilhão que agora parecia se instaurar lá fora. O ar carregava a fumaça sutil, quase imperceptível a instantes, mas agora enroscada em sua garganta como um aviso. O aroma misturado do pinho fresco e da terra úmida deixava espaço para o fio agudo do incêndio, como um sussurro vindo das sombras da floresta. Você se vira para trás, buscando a frágil chama que ainda tremulava no seu lar, esse remanso de calor e silêncio antes da tempestade. Mas a pequena luz parecia menor, uma fagulha hesitante diante do crescente frio do mundo. Entre as vozes contidas, alguém falou baixo demais para ser entendido, e então outra voz se ergueu, mais firme, quebrando o véu da calmaria com palavras como rebelde, perturbação. A palavra soava estranha e mordia seu espírito, invasora em um cotidiano construído sobre silêncios e ordens não ditas. Você sentiu o peso de olhares sobre si, tantos rostos mascarados pela preocupação e pela tensão, e a consciência de que todos compartilhavam o mesmo pressentimento de que algo estava se desmanchando lentamente, o tecido da ordem que mantinha aquele mundo em equilíbrio. Um equilíbrio feito de gestos contidos, passos medidos e suspiros sufocados. O chão frio sob suas sandálias lembrava que a estabilidade podia ser apenas uma ilusão tênue, que as pedras, bem polidas pelo tempo, escondiam rachaduras invisíveis. O sussurro do vento varria folhas mortas com um som seco, como se o mundo evitasse fazer barulho demais, para não despertar aquilo que já desperto esperava. Você notou o vulto que desaparecia na sombra dos abetos, aquela figura de olhos cintilantes que se misturava à penumbra, tão efêmera quanto uma sombra esquiva. O brilho fugaz nos olhos dessa presença carregava tantas perguntas quanto a névoa matinal carregava a umidade. O ar ao seu redor se densificava, o silêncio era pesado e repleto, não mais um espaço vazio, mas uma armadilha para a atenção. Diante de você, a praça se transformava lentamente. As tradicionais lanternas penduradas tremulavam com um leve vento, projetando formas vacilantes nas paredes das casas. A multidão se encolhia, buscando a segurança uns nos outros, enquanto a notícia do magistrado se propagava com a rapidez de um fogo invisível. Os sussurros se tornavam conspirações silenciosas, esperas tensas, olhos que buscavam entender sem ousar perguntar. Sua mão tocou um tronco de árvore próximo. A casca áspera foi um lembrete cru da realidade, que raízes podem tanto segurar quanto prender. O seu mundo, aquele onde cada gesto era ritual, agora se via frente a um enigma que desafia o sentido do conhecido. E mesmo assim, em meio à inquietude, você percebeu pequenas cenas de humanidades. O nó firme de um velho no dedo, a troca rápida de um olhar cheio de medo e firmeza, como se cada um carregasse sua própria tempestade interior. Enquanto o relógio do templo marcava as horas com seu som grave e pesado, o cheiro do arroz mal cozido se misturava ao de incenso estagnado, criando uma colcha de cheiros tão desconexa quanto a paz prestes a ruir. Você se perguntava até que ponto poderia se agarrar a isso, a esses fragmentos de normalidade que se esvaíam. E então, quando o silêncio parecia reaparecer para tentar restaurar a ordem, um grito cortou o ar. Não era um grito comum, mas um estilhaço de desespero e urgência que rodopiou na praça, levando o eco de uma história ainda não contada. Todos os olhares se viraram para a origem daquele som, para a fronteira tênue onde o bosque começava a engolir a luz do dia. Você sentiu, no fundo da garganta, o desdobrar de uma trama antiga e sombria, prestes a se revelar. O murmúrio da vida pacata havia se tornado o prelúdio de um terrível segredo. Um segredo que agora deixava de ser guardado. A floresta, uma vez longe do alcance, parecia expelir suas sombras, e em uma última visão, a figura que se dissipara nos pinheiros reapareceu, agora tão próxima que podia jurar sentir o peso invisível daquela presença. O mundo que você conhecia estava mudando, não com o estrondo abrupto de um trovão, mas na lenta e inexorável descida de um crepúsculo que escurecia as certezas antigas. A brisa que caminhava entre as árvores carregava não só folhas, mas também histórias proibidas, preparadas para emergir da penumbra. E naquele instante, em um segundo tão breve quanto eterno, o jardim pareceu prender a respiração, a terra aguardar um passo e o tempo hesitar, como se a própria história do seu mundo estivesse em suspense. Algo estava vindo, e você sabia que fosse o que fosse, não havia mais como voltar atrás. The sudden cry had barely settled into the cool morning air when a new cascade of murmurs rose, taut and trembling, like spider silk stretched across the courtyard. You stayed rooted. For a moment, feeling the weight of every gaze sharpening around you, a fragile network of unease, tightening like the clasp of an old kimono. The shadows under the pine trees stirred, whispering secrets just beyond reach, and the faint scent of smoke, heavier now, wove itself deeper into the fabric of the air. Your feet moved slowly at first. The wooden planks beneath your sandals gave a familiar creak, but it felt different today, as if each sound carried an echo from a world on the edge of unraveling. Voices thickened with urgency, fragments of hurried conversation, weaving in and out like restless cicadas hidden in the branches above. You passed the lacquered porch, where the fragile sheen of a once polished box caught a stray sunbeam, fractured like a promise half kept. Nearby, a crooked reed, shaken by a shiver of wind, caught your eye, golden and brittle against the gray undergrowth. The beauty was there, stubborn as ever, even when nothing else seemed steady. The magistrate's summons was more than an official order. It was a summons to a turning point, the cusp where daily ritual would collide with disorder. Your neighbors gathered in muted clusters, faces drained of color, but burning with questions that dared not be voiced aloud. They clung to the worn threads of normalcy, but the air was thick with the unspoken truth. Something ancient and sharp had pricked the veil, and the village trembled with it. You caught sight of the figure again, the man who carried shadows wherever he walked. His eyes, dark and unreadable, flicked toward you briefly. In that brief meeting, you sensed a shared recognition, a silent message heavier than the morning mist. He was a harbinger, or perhaps just a messenger, lost in the storm of quiet desperation. The scent of burning pine sharpened. Your nostrils flared involuntarily as a curl of ash drifted past, delicate but relentless, like a whispered warning. Somewhere beyond the protective ring of houses, a fire threatened to swallow all the calm in its path. Your fingertips brushed the cool wood of the doorframe, grounding you as you stepped fully into the courtyard. Gravel crunched underfoot, breaking the stillness in a small rebellion against the tide of silence. Children, pale and wide-eyed, clung to their elders' robes. Their presence, an innocent tremor in this rising tension. The woman who had spoken earlier approached you, her voice a threadbare veil of calm. "They say the rebels gather near the gates," she murmured, her words a tremor shaking the brittle veneer of peace. "The peace we clung to, it's unraveling." You absorbed the weight of those words, the echo of unrest seeping into every cracked tile and faded paper lantern. The walls that usually held your world in a slow, steady embrace seemed to pulse now with a restless energy, as if the village held its breath before a fall. Footsteps approached from the path that wove through the pines, a deliberate, uneven rhythm. You turned slowly, eyes drawn to the shifting silhouette that moved with the grace of someone accustomed to shadows. The man paused at the edge of the courtyard, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt, caught between the quiet you knew and the unknown that called. His hand slipped beneath the folds of his robe, and for a fleeting second, you glimpsed the glint of something hidden, the cold promise of a blade or perhaps a seal. The line between protector and threat blurred in that shadowed glance. From behind, a bell chimed, low and mournful, threading through the murmurs, like a slow unraveling stitch. The sound was a reminder that time was still moving, even if the world around you seemed suspended on fragile threads. You glanced toward the forest, where the shadows gathered thickest. The trees stood like silent witnesses, their secrets whispered in the rustling leaves, promising stories written in silence and blood. A current of cold skittered down your spine, not just from the chill, but from the raw pulse of change nothing could stop. A single leaf broke free, lazily spiraling, before landing near your feet. A quiet herald of the falling order. You stared at it, the fragile curl of dried green, and something inside you shifted. A kinship with that slow descent into the unknown. Your breath hitched as a sudden movement flickered at the tree line. The figure vanished into the growing gloom, swallowed by the forest's silent embrace. Yet the memory of those eyes lingered, sharp and probing, like twin stars in the dimming light. The courtyard exhaled, the tension folding into itself like the petals of a crushed chrysanthemum. The long, slow dawn had folded into an unexpected dusk, one embroidered not with the soft threads of routine, but with the piercing stitch of upheaval. You drew your robe tighter around your shoulders, the silk a thin but determined shield against the gathering cold. The hearth back in your chamber seemed a distant memory now, a trembling ember fighting the wind. And then, as if summoned by the silent promise seeping through the air, a new sound broke the hush. Not quite a cry, not yet a signal, but a soft, rhythmic tapping echoing from the gatehouse, like a heartbeat, steady and insistent. You knew, without knowing how, that whatever was coming had already begun. The delicate, quiet of your world was cracking, and in that fracture, a door was opening, leading you into a story far beyond the calm you had known, where every step forward would carry the weight of shadow and light. And beneath the distant pines, where mist curled thick and heavy, a single figure waited, patient as the dawn, watching as the village's heartbeat shifted, ready to strike. The brittle leaf at your feet seemed to hold its breath, caught mid-descent, as if the world itself hesitated before the coming storm. You glanced back toward the village path, where silhouettes blurred softly under the waning light, shadows lengthening like dark fingers reaching through the thinning calm. The once familiar courtyard had transformed into a stage, threaded with whispers and wary silence. Fleeting eyes flicked between faces, searching, questioning, but finding no easy answers. The murmurs had grown into a low hum now, an undercurrent of tension that vibrated beneath the measured steps of those who dared to move. Your fingers lingered on the cool curve of the doorframe before you pushed it wider, stepping out under the heavy sky that pressed close, the scent of burning pine wrapping around you like a warning. Small embers from distant fires, carried on the breath of a restless wind, drifted lazily, like ghostly lanterns, flickering uncertain truths as they tumbled through the air. The man from the shadows had vanished into the crowd, but his presence lingered, a kind of quiet menace that taunted the fragile order you had leaned on for so long. His eyes, dark and unreadable, seemed to have stolen a piece of your own, leaving behind a hollow knot of anticipation. Children gathered nervously near a weathered stone, their wide eyes reflecting the flickering lanterns, innocent but keenly aware of the fractures splitting their world. An elderly woman adjusted her robe, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she whispered for calm that had long since fled. You felt the rough texture of worn wooden beams beneath your palm, grounding you as your gaze searched the restless crowd. Conversations rose and fell like a restless tide. Words slipped through, fragments caught on the wind. Rebels, magistrates' orders, gates breached. Each syllable was a stone dropped into the still pond of your ordered existence, sending ripples that dared to disturb even the deepest silence. A distant bell tolled again, its mournful clang threading through the thickening dusk like an elegy for the peace unraveling at your feet. The villagers' murmurs stilled momentarily, faces tilting upward, absorbing the weight of the summons. Beneath the solemn tones ran an unmistakable current of fear, the sharp, electric edge that crackles just before the air breaks with thunder. You stepped forward, sandal feet crunching softly against scattered gravel. Each step felt heavier, as if the earth beneath you was quietly collapsing. Lanterns swayed gently above, casting fractured light on faces etched with weariness and silent resolve. The woman who had approached earlier caught your glance once more, urgency pulsing in her eyes as she mouthed a single word, "Prepare." Her warning hung between you, as delicate and dangerous as a thread stretched too tight. As dusk slid further into night, a faint rustle at the forest's edge commanded your attention. A swift movement cloaked in the gathering shadows. The figure you had glimpsed before emerged once again, lingering just beyond reach. Their eyes gleamed like distant stars, cold and unblinking, carrying a promise as weighty as the darkness itself. The scent of smoke sharpened, biting at your senses. Somewhere beyond the village perimeter, the telltale crackle of flames whispered of fires kindling with intent, a grim signal underscoring the urgency of what was to come. Though your heart pounded, the stillness around you held a strange beauty. A lone reed bent under its own weight, catching the last of the sun's farewell light, glowing faintly with a soft gold hue, nature's stubborn defiance against the shadow creeping into your world. Time seemed to fold upon itself, tightening the invisible web that bound the villagers in a shared, trembling hope. Hope that this storm might yet pass, that the fragile peace could be salvaged from the gathering dark. But as the distant steps of the magistrate's party echoed ever closer, heavy with the promise of judgment and change, the tension coiled tighter still. Your breath caught when the figure from the woods stepped silently into a patch of weak lamplight, revealing only a fleeting glance of a blade's cold gleam beneath their cloak. A sudden gust swept through the courtyard, scattering leaves like whispered secrets, torn from the pages of an old story. The fireflies flickered, their lights bobbing uncertainly, mirroring the flicker of courage and fear mingling in the air. You wrapped your robe more tightly around your shoulders, the smooth silk a small comfort against the chill seeping in, not just from the evening air, but from the unknown that pressed against the threshold of your life. And then, as if the night itself held its breath, a sharp cry split the silence. A raw sound of rage and despair carried swiftly on the wind. It shattered the fragile quiet with jagged edges, rippling outward through the village like a stone cast into still water. Eyes snapped toward the forest's edge, where shadows converged and pulsed in ominous waves. The figure was gone again, swallowed by the darkness, leaving behind only the echo of those unblinking eyes and the whisper of a long-buried secret poised to surface. For a brief moment, the village seemed suspended, in time, in fear, and the fragile hope that even as the world bent beneath chaos, you might find a way through the coming storm. But the path had already shifted beneath your feet, and the night was only beginning to unveil its stories. The chill in the air had deepened, wrapping around your shoulders like a gauzy shroud, as the village held its breath beneath a sky heavy with muted colors. The lingering scent of smoke twisted with the pine's sharp bite, crawling slowly through the alleys and over stone steps. an invisible thread sewing unease to every corner where lantern light flickered. You stood at the boundary where your quiet room met the restless courtyard, the weathered wood cool beneath your fingers, a fragile hinge amid a world teetering on the edge. Around you, eyes flickered like tiny flames, uncertain and searching, reflecting the storm gathering just beyond the fragile peace. The murmurs grew sharper, a restless tide shaking the tight fabric of routine. From the cluster near the temple, a low murmur broke. The magistrate's summons, a summons heavy with unspoken consequences, had wound through the village like a thread pulled taut, threatening to unravel the delicate order everyone clung to. A child's breath caught nearby, a thin sound lost in the swell, but somehow poignant against the growing weight. The elders pressed tighter, their bodies bowing under invisible pressure, faces carved by years of silent endurance, and eyes now wide with a flicker of fear. The shadowed figure you'd seen twice before moved with deliberate ease through the crowd, his form almost swallowed by the dim light. No longer a stranger, but still a secret carried in the shape of a man. His gaze brushed past you briefly, a quick flash of shadow and steel, a warning folded in silence. Your hand brushed along the edge of a wooden pillar, the grain rough as though the timber itself bore witness to all the changes closing in. Nearby, a single reed bent stiffly against the rising wind, catching the last of the dying, light in a brief shimmer of golden defiance. Inside, the fading embers of your hearth seemed that much more fragile, flickering desperately against the gathering dusk. They whispered of warmth slipping away, a comfort thinner now than the delicate paper walls that shielded you from this slow unraveling. Voices broached topics that once would have been taboo: rebels, unrest, the gates. Each word shook the village like a stone dropped in still water, sending invisible ripples through worn robes and practiced politeness. One of the women, near the temple's entrance, her voice barely above a breath but steady, leaned closer, eyes sharp and trembling, just enough to betray the calm on her face. They say the rebels move closer. The peace we knew, it falls away. You felt a coldness trail down your spine, the echo of those words settling like frost over the soft edges of your world. The courtyard's familiar rhythms twisted, slow footsteps giving way to hurried shuffles and whispered commands, like the subtle fray that precedes a tear. Steps came on the gravel path, familiar but sharpened, urgent. You turned towards the sound and caught sight of the magistrate's party, cloaked figures threading through the village's thinning light like dark brushstrokes on pale paper. Their arrival wasn't just an event. It marked the crossing from old order to uncertain possibility. Beyond them, the forest's edge quivered with movement. The elusive figure slipped through the shadows again, the faint glint of something cold tucked beneath the folds of a cloak catching what little light remained. That presence didn't just pass through space, it altered it, bending the air with unspoken intent. A distant bell tolled with solemn gravity, each reverberation cracking through the night like a breath held too long. The village turned as one to face the sound, as if the chiming could steady the unraveling threads of their shared existence. The sky darkened further, ink pooling between the pines, swallowing even the stubborn stars. A wind stirred, carrying with it the crisp scent of ash and something else, something metallic, sharp, and new. The balance had shifted. The stillness was a memory suspended on the cusp of a storm. Hands clenched the edges of robes. Children held close to chests like fragile offerings. You wrapped your own silk. Tighter, a thin barrier against the cold pressing in. The quiet beauty of earlier, the bent reed, the soft glow of firelight, felt like a fragile promise, slithing steadily beyond reach. And then, barely more than a breath on the wind, a sudden crack. Not the gentle snap of a twig, but a sound clearer, more deliberate, like the closing of a seal, a door shutting on the known world. You turned your gaze back to the shadow at the forest's fringe, eyes fixed on the figure, whose silhouette now stood carved sharply against the faint glow of distant flames. Those glinting eyes met yours once more, unblinking, unreadable, heavy with the weight of stories yet to unfold. The village exhaled, some hearts with hope, some with fear, but none could deny the fracture now present in the very air. Tonight, the calm unravels, and beyond the trees, a hush fell over the waiting shadows as something ancient and resolute stirred to life, stepping quietly toward the gathering storm. The breath of dusk settled heavier now, soft and slow. A weighted pause upon the village's frayed edges. You stood there, the silk of your robe whispering a delicate protest against the cool night air, as the silence stretched taut between murmurs and shadowed glances. The courtyard, once a place of measured calm, now hummed quietly, with secrets electrified by whispered warnings. The faint crackle of embers from your hearth had long since faded into a memory, leaving the air cold and bare. A breeze curled through the open doorway, carrying the scent of ash and damp earth, threading itself through the nervous shimmer of lantern light. Somewhere beyond the pines, a fire's distant groan whispered its slow, relentless claim. Your gaze swept over the gathering, faces pale, eyes sharp and wary. Fractures of a community balanced precariously on the edge of change. Children clung silently to their mothers' sides, their breaths shallow, as if trying not to disturb the brittle tension lingering like frozen dew on the morning grass. A low bell tolled again, each sonorous chime unraveling the fragile silence like a dropped thread from an old kimono. The villagers glanced skyward, lips pressed thin, waiting for a sign, any sign, that this tightening coil might somehow loosen before it snapped. the man from the shadows stepped once more into view, his movement fluid and cautious, like a leaf drifting just beyond reach. His eyes met yours again, dark and unreadable pools, but this time something deeper flickered beneath the surface, a flicker of urgency, a silent summons written between the lines of dusk and smoke. He moved toward the gathering, careful not to draw too much attention, yet carrying a weight impossible to ignore. The fabric of his robe rustled softly over stones worn smooth by 1,000 footsteps, those of ancestors whose stories now hovered meaninglessly in the thick night air. You sensed the undercurrent of conversations barely spoken aloud. Words like betrayal, the magistrate's will, those who watch in the dark, slipping through cracks in polite smiles and nods, too hurried to be comforting. The village was no longer merely on the cusp of a reckoning. It was already moving under its shadow. Nearby, the temple lanterns flickered uncertainly, casting swaying shadows that danced like specters upon the weathered walls. A single reed, bent low by a sudden gust, caught the dying light, its slender leaves flickering gold before surrendering to the night's embrace. Its fragile shimmer felt like a whispered hope, small and trembling, against the gathering storm. Your fingers traced the edge of the doorframe, the smooth lacquer, cold and grounding beneath your touch. The world beyond your chamber was no longer the slow-turning wheel of ritual and quiet days. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that tightens the throat and sends shivers like falling leaves along the spine. A sudden murmur rippled through the crowd, words barely audible but sharp in their implication. The magistrate had arrived at the gates, his presence heavy with judgment and change alike. The distant sound of raised voices cut through the night's hush, a discordant chorus breaking the village's fragile harmony. Your heart quickened, pulse skimming the surface like a stone skipping over still water. You caught sight of the paper seal, crimson and official, clutched tightly in the hands of an elder, a symbol both ancient and irrevocable. The shadowed figure paused at the fringe of the gathering, as if weighing the air before stepping forward. His hand flicked beneath his robe once again, revealing a gleam so brief it might have been a trick of the flickering lantern. Light, a flash of steel, or perhaps a token of secret allegiance. The villagers' breath held collectively, caught on the delicate balance between fear and resolve. The fireflies flickered overhead, their pale lights bobbing against the dark like hopes hovering just out of reach. You swallowed, the dryness of the night filling your mouth. Somewhere in the depths of this gathering storm, a story was breaking free, a thread unraveling a tapestry carefully woven through years of silence and restraint. The crisp scent of ash grew stronger, mingling with the metallic edge now unmistakable in the night air. the whispers of rebellion had drawn closer, threading through the village like a restless shadow. The gates, once steadfast and silent, stood vulnerable beneath the watchful stars. Your eyes caught a motion at the forest's edge, a figure stepping from darkness to dim light. Their gaze locked with yours, unblinking and cold, a silent challenge carved from dusk and hidden fury. The cavern between safety and chaos yawned wide beneath their feet. A sudden gust swept through the courtyard, sighing against lanterns, rustling robes, and sending loose leaves to scatter like forgotten promises. The night seemed to hold its breath once more, poised on the delicate cusp of what was coming. You tightened your grip on your robe, the silk a thin shield against the night's chill and the unknown stirring beyond. Then a sharp report, like the snapping of a bone or the closing of a door, rattled through the stillness. Heads turned sharply, eyes searching the deepening shadows. The figure at the forest's edge vanished, swallowed whole by the inky black. And as the village held its collective breath, you understood something undeniable. The silence had shattered, and in its breaking, a new story was born, one you could no longer watch from the quiet. The night had settled softly over the village, its old wooden houses bathed in the gentle silver of a waning moon. The restless tension that had stretched the hours earlier now eased into a hushed patience, like the quiet breath between storms. You stood once more at the threshold where your dim chamber met the courtyard, your fingers tracing the cool lacquered frame, a fragile boundary between the weight of what was lost and the fragile hope of what might remain. The air carried the faintest trace of pine smoke, now distant and fading, a remnant of the fires that had threatened to unravel the calm. The village, though marked by unease, was still whole, its stones firm beneath skeptical steps, its lanterns casting soft pools of light like constellations scattered quietly over the earth. Somewhere beyond the trees, the forest held its secrets close, its shadows less threatening for now. Folded back into the night's embrace, you stepped outside, sandals brushing over gravel still cool from the early breeze. Around you, neighbors moved with cautious grace, their faces reflecting a shared weariness, yet a quiet resolve. The sharp, urgent word, rebels, had rippled through their conversations, but now it softened, turning into stories told in measured tones, careful to mend frayed nerves with the balm of familiarity. Children, no longer wide-eyed with fear, clung gently to their guardians, their breaths steady against the night's lingering chill. The elders whispered to one another, not in hurried panic, but in voices cracked by age and tempered by years of endurance, telling of days long past and those still to come. The magistrate's summons, once a looming threat, had passed into memory, leaving behind a silence, not of emptiness, but of quiet reckoning. Your gaze drifted to the fragile reed, that had caught the golden light just hours before. It now swayed softly under the moon's pale glow, a slender silhouette, bent but unbroken, a symbol of stubborn persistence. Around it, the courtyard seemed to breathe again, a collective tension dissolving like morning mist under the rise of sun. You found yourself drawn back to the hearth within your chamber, where the last ember had refused to be extinguished, flickering faintly in a small bowl of ash. That ember was no longer a fragile flame fighting the night, but a quiet heartbeat, a small defiance against the creeping cold, a reflection of the village's slow but certain pulse toward renewal. Step by step, the memories of the day folded into the calm of the evening. The shadowed figure from the forest's edge, once a harbinger, had vanished like a breath on the wind. The glint of blade or seal had receded into legend, leaving only the imprint of a silent watchman whose story would be told in hushed tones for seasons to come. Your hand rested lightly on the polished lacquer box by your side, its surface smooth as years of ritual. Within its silent depths lay the folded cranes, delicate and precise, each one a testament to patience, hope, and the quiet craft of holding moments together. You recalled the slow folding of paper, the delicate blossoming of ritual, a dance of calm in a world too often defined by upheaval. Outside, the soft murmur of voices blended with the rustle of leaves, creating a lullaby both ancient and familiar. The village had weathered the storm's first approach. It had not been easy. No dawn ever is after shadow and fire. But it had endured. The rising tension was balance regained, a mosaic mended with care. You allowed yourself a breath, slow and steady, feeling the weight in your chest ease, a gentle reminder that beginnings and endings are entwined, that each closing door bends toward a future room where light quietly waits. The delicate interplay of scents, pine, faint ash, simmering rice, clung to the air, weaving their quiet symphony around the houses. The night was no longer a blanket of fear. It was a canvas of promises still unfolding in the soft rhythms of daily life. As your eyes softened and the world settled, the thin paper doors of your chamber embraced their role once again, silent guardians of your space, shielding you from the cold, yet inviting the dreams carried on whispered winds. You sat then, the silk of your robe brushing gently against worn wood and quiet memories. The embers glow, steady now, a whispered warmth echoing through the stillness, like a forgotten melody returning to its song. Outside, the village breathes on, fragile, unyielding, beautiful in its quiet resilience. The stories once tangled in shadow have found their place in the light, folded gently away like the cranes resting in your hands. Tonight, the silence is no longer a promise of fear, but a soft invitation to rest, the slow exhale that comes after storms have settled. and hearts find their quiet rhythm once more. And as your eyelids grow heavy beneath the calm embrace of the night, the world waits patiently, cradled in the tender hush of a story finally at peace.